Hello. Welcome to the Tony Crumb Show. It's me, myself, and I. No AI. I am Tony Crumb. Thank you for tuning in. I want to thank everyone who watched the first introductory video for the Tony Crumb Show. Thank you for tuning in to this episode in which I will be talking about some movies today. We're definitely going to get into some things in revolving trilogies. Movies that have a three-part movie set to the story at hand. Some of these movies I watched throughout my time as a child, teenager, and adult life. I had to really think about what movies actually had trilogies, because some of these trilogy movies ended up becoming series and or a franchise, meaning more than three. And some of these movies or franchises kind of had me going back and forth and how I wanted to include these inside the list. And we're gonna go over top five. But before that, as you can see behind me, and most likely you'll probably be seeing throughout the course of some of these episodes, I have this lovely shrine of my fiance, my wife, Gabby, in which I put a lot of effort and time into. And I actually did some cleaning and some dusting around, and because I always like to keep her nice and fresh. But this is my setup I have for her and only her, and this would always be up as long as I'm around, and will always be up until the wheels fall off. And I hope that people can either just accept and really appreciate what I have done for her, not only throughout the course of her life, in which I knew and was a part of, but also in terms of honoring her and celebrating her as well, because I love that woman like there was no tomorrow. And yeah, I just, I will always love her, and I'll always honor her and celebrate her in every way possible. And I hope she can honestly sit there and tell me she's proud of me of the things that I have done since her passing. I have a hard time accepting her passing still at times. There's times where I wish I could just talk to her one last time, or not even just one last time, just I wish I could just talk to her and hear her voice and just talk to her about everything that's been going on. And I really hope she's happy and proud of me for what I have done so far. And I miss her a lot. But with that being said, I'm going to continue on with the show and kind of break down some of these movies that, like I said, there's trilogies, and this is what I guess I would like to call a crumb of knowledge, movie style. Going over Tony Crumb's top 5 trilogies. And like I said, I had some time to think about it. Some of it was kind of challenging in terms of what I wanted to put. I know everyone's not going to accept it and or agree with The trilogies I have placed in order, but the ones I did place in order was hard because, I guess I'll just mention the honorable mentions. I wanted to put The Matrix in there, but unfortunately they made a fourth movie, so now that becomes a franchise. I even thought about placing Lethal Weapon, which was a great series of movies, but that has four movies in it as well. I thought about even placing the original trilogy of the Star Wars, but they obviously added to that story and place other movies into that to add to that, and I couldn't put it in there just because of that. I also wanted to add some other movies to it as well, but not unfortunate, but some of these trilogies ended up adding an extra movie or two to it and no longer become trilogies. So I would say an honorable mention also that is actually a trilogy was the Naked Gun series back in the day with Leslie Nielsen, and how much that series, especially that type of slapstick comedy and the way they delivered some of the punchlines and or physical comedy to the movies were hilarious, and always they had great gags in the movie. It made me laugh a lot throughout my childhood and teenage years, even adult years. As I watch it now, I just kind of sit back and look at it thinking like, these are some of the comedies that really had me going in terms of laughter. But I'm going to start off right now with number 5, and it's not a popular pick, but I do know it's my pick, and I guess we start off now with the Godfather series, the trilogy of the Godfather. I really didn't watch The Godfather a whole lot. Not to say I didn't watch them. I just probably just watched it throughout the course of my time of life. I probably watched it a handful of times. And I put it at number 5 because not just because the popularity of the movie itself and or other people's perspective and or thoughts about the movie itself. I just really think it tells a nice story in terms of a family's rise to power in the criminal world, I guess, and just the rise of power, and then how much it falls throughout the course of time and in the course of the storytelling. The Godfather Part 1 was actually, obviously the one that started it all. It really goes through a lot of storytelling in terms of Don Vito, I believe, on how just basically how he was the main guy, the head honcho, the Don, and watching how everything he did and what he wanted to bestow onto his sons, and hopefully take up his mantle should the day come he is no longer there, and obviously continue on the legacy that he built. And they a lot of twists and turns in that first movie, even from Sonny's murder, his setup, his believe it was his sister's husband that ended up ultimately help set him up to. There was a scene where he gets a call apparently from saying that the guy, his sister had been getting beat by her husband, and he had went over to his sister's house to basically kick the shit out of him. and tell him, if you ever put hands on my sister again, I'm gonna kill you. And he ended up making, giving him that ultimatum, basically, to telling him to get his shit together and take care of his sister rather than doing the things that he was doing, which was pretty jacked up. And then, as time goes by in the film, Sonny gets set up, and as he's going through what I believe is the toll booth, and he's waiting, and he's sitting there realizing there's no one in the there was one person in a toll booth, I think, and then all of a sudden this person ends up like ducking inside the booth itself. And I think it was when he realized like something didn't feel right, and then all of a sudden these cars pull up behind him, and he already knew what was going on, and they just start blasting him hundreds of times with their Tommy guns and pistols and whatnot. Just a brutal scene. In terms of how they got rid of him, and it kind of shows the brutality of how things were handled within that story, and I guess that time frame, which is really, really crazy. And then you kind of see the introduction of Michael Corleone, on how he, it kind of seems throughout the movie, he doesn't seem like he's considered the main guy to replace the Don. And there are certain things where he, kind of gives, I don't know, I guess he kind of, just the way he talks and the way his mindset was and some of the things he had to do. I believe he had he also was put into a position where he had to off someone as well, and he went into this meeting or whatever in a restaurant, and goes into the bathroom to pick up the gun that they had set up there, and he ends up blasting dude in the domer. And I think that move alone set up the grounds to not only just, I guess it just sets the grounds to let everyone know that Michael was the next guy up, and he was going to be the one to take the reins of looking over the family and everything else once, the Don had passed away, and his father, and everything ends up going that way at some point, because during the course of the film, you see how everything's going. I mean, even the Don gets, I believe there was an attempted murder on him as well, and he ends up surviving it somehow. And all the while he's injured and doing all these things, that's where Michael comes in and starts doing all these things while in his absence, his father's absence. And I think that's why eventually he starts getting the respect of certain members of the family to kind of take over that business of theirs. Ultimately, the Don ends up passing away because, from what I remember, he's in the garden playing with his little grandbaby and ends up having like a heart attack and falls over and dies, which is a sad scene, really. Just, I mean, considering I know everything else was, is what it is of the movie, but just to have that scene where he kind of hunches over and ends up passing away in front of his grandkids was it's a real emotional scene, especially now. Now that I think about it, and considering all the things that has happened, just seeing that scene in that movie kind of just hits a little tougher. It's a little more emotional than not, and really hits hard sometimes watching that scene. But but going into the second one, I think the second one kind of The Godfather Part 2, in which that kind of, it goes back and forth. It's kind of weird where it goes back in time to show Vito's rise to power, and then cuts back into the what was that present time in which Michael was kind of has taken over the family business. And you kind of see how Michael is fighting to keep everything going, and you kind of see him struggle a little bit in terms of how to make the moves without messing anything up. And obviously he's trying to he's trying to do the things his father does, but I mean, I think he kind of realizes he's not his father. I think he even goes to Italy at one point to kind of get familiar with his roots, his family roots, and ends up, to my understanding, from what I remember of the film, he ends up marrying what was to be his wife in Italy. He goes to the motherland and finds out how everything is, I guess. And like I said, gets in touch with his roots. And I believe the family or the rival gang or family that he is in rival with ends up finding him and completely massacre everyone in Italy in terms of who was there, including the wife that he had married. And then I think that ultimately gets him into a headspace where he could come back into the United States and start doing his damage, so to speak, in terms of how he wanted to handle all those things that were happening to him in that second one. And like I said, it just keeps going back and forth. And then ultimately at the end of towards the end of the movie, you kind of see how some things happen to where he figures out his brother Fredo is betraying the family and doing things that are behind his back and kind of goes against the family in ways. And once he finds that out, he does like a hire to plot murder to kill his brother, and which ultimately ends up happening. Which is wild to just know that's how that happens in that aspect of that movie and that storytelling, where he has to kill his brother, or he feels that he needs to get rid of his brother somehow, some way. And that's a trippy one in itself. And then the third one, Godfather Part 3. I think a lot of people tend to either forget about that one and or doesn't give its praises as the first two. The third one kind of goes over, Michael kind of just trying to do things a little different than what he used to. I think he tries to do things like legitimately instead of doing everything illegally. And I believe some of the older mob heads didn't like what he was doing and felt like he was kind of undermining them, but kind of trying to get over on them, and they weren't feeling that. So I think just some things happen in the movie. Like I said, I barely watched it on a handful of times to completely understand and remember scene by scene and how those things went down. But I just, from what I remember and gathered from that movie, I believe Sonny has an illegitimate son, and he becomes Michael's protege, so to speak. And eventually I believe he's trying to take over the business itself. And I just there's that scene where Michael's daughter gets shot and ends up dying in the movie after being shot. I think they're leaving like an opera or something like that, and There's this, I think it was supposed to be a hit on Michael, but they ended up killing the daughter instead. I believe it was by accident. I don't think it was meant for her to die in that scene. I think it was meant for Michael, and I guess it was just like a complete mistake on everything. And Michael ends up dying alone. I believe he ends up having somewhat like what his father had, and just has this heart attack and just plops over and just passes away. And kind of, I believe, like near a garden as well. Kind of there's that weird thing of how him and his father kind of passes away at almost the same way. But it seems like I believe Michael dies on his own. His actual wife is no longer there, and his daughter is no longer there. And that, I guess, the tone of the movie kind of sets itself as if, Michael has done so many wrong things that, this is the price he pays for doing all the evil he's done, as well, running the family and everything, and possibly for the murder of his brother. He ends up dying alone, and with no one there with him, and that in itself can be, a cruel punishment, because Lord knows, I would hate to, die alone and not have anyone there. Which is, just kind of sucks. Like I said in the previous episode before this, death is just a weird concept, and people seem to act differently once those things happens, and Lord knows what's happened in the movie in terms of movie, like a storyline on what happens thereafter. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really get into great detail on what happens after that, because like I said, a lot of things can happen. I mean, you see it in stories, in the news, and other people in terms of family, and how some families deal with death, and sometimes there's money involved, and you see a lot of betrayal happen because of money. Ultimately, people kind of stake claims and make up stories, in which kind of sucks, because it involves the person that passes away, and it's hard to hear people make up stories and or tell a story a certain way, because that person is no longer there to either agree with that or defend that in any way. So a lot of things get mixed up in terms of, what is said thereafter a person's death. But it's just one of those weird things. But it never gets to that in that movie, in that series of The Godfather, in terms of what happens thereafter once Michael passes away, and kind of just leaves off with that. Going into these trilogy movies and trying to rank them was kind of, like I said, just real difficult in choosing which ones. But I went based off my knowledge, and which goes into number 4, the Friday series. Now, I know they're trying to make a fourth one, from what I hear in rumors and reading in rumors. In the rumor mill, that I believe Ice Cube is making a fourth one, possibly, but like I said, they're just rumors. But for right now, Friday is a trilogy. Friday, next Friday, and Friday after next. Obviously, Friday, the ultimate classic that we all know and love, and it's funny how we watch these movies as kids, and like, it's crazy. I don't think I would ever show Connie Friday until like maybe she's 12, 13, you know what I mean? And even then it's kind of sketchy, but still, like, I was watching Friday since I was 8 years old, 9 years old, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, I don't think I could ever show Connie Friday in that time span, or in that within an early age. I mean, if she sees it with me, she sees it because I'm probably watching it with, either her aunts and uncles or cousins or whatever, or her older cousins. But just, it's so wild to think that that's what we were watching as kids, knowing today, like, all the things that goes on in that movie, and just how the comedy that goes down in that movie, and the things that are said. And at one point where I was living in Gardena, around the corner where I was living at, there's actually the that strip part where they show, not the strip, but there's that stretch of road where Smokey and Craig goes to that liquor store where they bump into Ezel. And in that part where Ezel falls over and it's like, oh, my neck and my back. You know what I mean? Like, that scene right there in that liquor store was literally up the block from where I used to live in Gardena. And it's funny, when I was living over there, we would, me and Gabby and Connie, and especially Connie when she was a baby, we'd like to take her out for walks. And we'd always pass by there, just passing by. And then we would always, say a line from the movie from Friday, and just, crack up. And there was times where we just went right there because, I mean, it was a liquor store. It was somewhere just to get something to drink, a soda, a can of soda, or just like some chips that we wanted to snack on while we were on the walk, because sometimes it would get hot. And sometimes, if it was just, something to snack on while we took a walk or whatever. We would head over there, and it was cool kind of to seeing, like, knowing, like, there's that piece of, I guess you can say, cinematic landmark there, to just kind of, every time we walk past there, just like, oh, snaps, this is where they shot Friday at. And just, there's so many countless memories watching that movie, that, everyone knows, kind of, seemingly, up until this generation of kids now. I don't think some of them really know Friday like that. But, that movie in itself has been highly repeated and talked about. And, I don't want to say mocked in any way, but just, it's been acted out. So many scenes have been acted out from that movie, and a lot of laughs have been made watching that movie. And oh man, that movie is just an instant classic in its own, and I dare say universal to a lot of people. And just a core childhood memory of mine, watching that movie. Back in the day, used to just, when we're at home from school during the summer, we would pop that thing open. This is VHS. We're talking VHS, VCR days. You know what I mean? And we would pop in the VHS movie, make some top ramen with some fucking bologna sandwiches, stack that bologna, baby, and just eat the sandwich and top ramen, and watch the movie, and just, have a good time. And I remember that a lot in my childhood days. And it's, like I said, just that movie is an instant classic, and just so many memories growing up with that movie. Going into next Friday, with Craig beating up on Debo, you know what I mean? And it kind of shows him where he's at in his life, and eventually Debo breaks free from prison, trying to get some revenge on Craig, and kind of forcing Craig to move out of the hood, so to speak, into Rancho Cucamonga, and to go live with his cousin and his uncle, and however they stay over there. And it just turns out that I guess his uncle picked lottery picked lottery numbers to win the lottery, and all of a sudden they have all this money. And just going through all that that scene in terms of, or I guess that storyline of the movie where, they're sitting there and they're smoking a blunt. And they're just sitting there and they just started talking about how he picked his numbers, and he was telling them the numbers he picked, and he was like, he was trying to clown on the aunt, which was his wife at the time, saying that was her weight, which was jacked up in itself. And the scenes that follow thereafter, he sees how his uncle's living, ever since he kind of lost his wife in a sense, and how he started messing around with this lady, and seeing how his cousin Day Day lived. Obviously, he used some of his money to buy himself a BMW, acting like he had 20s when they were 10s, but he kept them clean though. Getting this girl pregnant, and I guess he was trying to say like that wasn't his baby, because the girl was trying to say that Day Day was the father, and Day Day was like, no, that I'm not the father. And I guess the girlfriend that's pregnant had a sister named Baby D, in which Day Day was absolutely scared of. And I guess that part in Next Friday, that was another. I mean, it's kind of funny how some of these movies ended up becoming, kind of these classic movies, because, obviously, like I said, Friday was such a huge film. And then I think when Next Friday came out, I think to me, it wasn't as big of a hit as Friday. I think people were really excited to see the sequel to Friday, but considering, obviously, not seeing Chris Tucker in that movie kind of took the excitement out of everything, because I think people were really excited to see Chris Tucker alongside with Ice Cube in that movie, and kind of continue on the shenanigans that they had done and created. And I think once it was either announced and or shown that Chris Tucker wasn't going to be in the movie, I think everyone had questions like, why isn't he in there? Obviously, Chris Tucker ended up going to do Rush Hour, which was, we'll get to that later, another runner up for some of these trilogies. But I think once Next Friday came out without Chris Tucker, I think that took the hype out, and the eagerness of people wanting to see that movie right away. But I think throughout the course of time, people started to watch it, got used to it. Obviously, the comedy in there was pretty funny and memorable at best. And I think that movie grew on a lot of people, and ended up becoming, I don't know, I guess I don't want to say a cult classic, but just like it just became something that became, accepted as part of the sequel going into that movie franchise. Everything that happened in that movie, like I said, from Day Day running into Baby D, from Craig figuring out that the neighbors who were cholos, possibly having some money, because Day Day and the family ended up getting an eviction notice saying that they needed to pay for the house, and ended up finding out that they only had very little money left over from all the money they won from the lottery. And then finding out that the neighbors ended up having money that they could use to pay off some of the stuff that they had that they had debt for. Even more so with Pops, rest in peace, man, that coming down from where they lived and going in to pick up his son, because Debo and I believe his name was Tyrone, was fake calling him to let them know that Craig was in trouble. And he ended up going down there in his dog truck and trying to go to help out Craig. R.I.P. Will Witherspoon for giving us such a classic character and giving us a bunch of laughs. There's times I find myself, repeating some of the stuff he does, including anytime I get a burrito and get some salsa or some hot sauce, I always, put some hot sauce on my burrito, baby, because you sure look good to me. And, and you know what I mean? Just those little things that he did that, gave us all laughs, and not just me. I'm sure plenty of fans and people who watched that movie gave them a lot of joy and laughter and moments to really that stuck with them, and kind of, obviously that was his legacy, was making a lot of people laugh, and with his style of comedy that he brought to movies and TV shows. He just, he was that guy that gave off a lot of laughter and good times. Going further into the movie, Day Day and Craig end up breaking into the house and trying to get the money. All the while, the cholos are finding out little by little that that Craig was up to something. Day Day was up with it, and eventually they get Roach and Mixed involved with everything, and they ended up Roach ended up getting the little their little dog Chico on their side. He was a vicious little ass dog, and Roach ended up giving him like a weed brownie, and they ended up having this moment to where they were you know what I mean, like they developed some sort of bond there afterwards because they had this moment together. And then eventually they all get the money and everything is back to normal. Debo goes back put into jail and all this other stuff. And like I said, it ended up being a nice sequel to the original movie, which like I said, I don't think it was much of a big. I think it lost its hype once they found out Chris Tucker wasn't going to be in it. And then, like I said, just throughout the course of time, just became a nice sequel to the original movie. And then going on to the third one, Friday After Next, which to me, we've all had these Christmas movies as, every year, watching Home Alone or watching A Christmas Story or Nightmare Before Christmas, just always watching these Christmas movies that, felt like were mandatory. You had to watch them, right? Who doesn't watch Home Alone during Christmas? Home Alone 2, like they're all highly considered Christmas movies, and maybe we'll get into that. Maybe that'll be another topic in terms of what's considered a Christmas movie and how that's changed, because like I said, it seems like there was only maybe a handful of titles that are widely considered Christmas movies, but there's other movies that involve Christmas themes, and I would say you can chalk them up to being Christmas movies, but maybe, we'll get into that some other time, and we'll do that as another episode at some point. But, Friday After Next was in that time frame in which it was during the holidays of Christmas. And that movie kind of follows up with Craig and Day Day and how they started living with each other, living in an apartment, and kind of having that weird scene that happens in the beginning of the movie where the ghetto Santa, so to speak, or the broke Santa, the homeless Santa, kind of just goes in there and steals all their stuff. And I guess he's a serial burglar that wanted to just have his own things or take other people's stuff and make it his own for Christmas, you know what I mean, and have his own holiday spirit in it, so to speak. But Craig and Day Day ended up getting robbed by this imposter Santa, and eventually, ends up finding out that they need to pay rent and pay on time before they get kicked out. And they ended up starting new jobs. That the movie starts off with them getting new jobs, starting the first day as security guards, which is also, it's crazy how some of these scenes in Friday involve places that some of us grew up around and or have passed by these places 100,000 times. And I just remember seeing the little mini mall that they ended up working at. Those little small miniature places where they have a bunch of storefronts in one little area, and seeing that on Carson Street, I believe, it's funny in itself because, like I said, we passed by that place 1,000 times, and just to see that place in general set up for a movie was cool and funny in itself. And then obviously working there, Craig's dad ends up helping him get that job there because they know the guy who owns the lot, so to speak, he owns the donut shop there. Holy Moly Donut Shop. And the dad and the Uncle Elroy ended up getting into business with themselves as well, partners, and getting a barbecue spot. Barbecue so good, make you want to slap your mama. And they ended up showing them how they made a commercial for their business and how they kind of run it. And, there's that funny scene where they're just, because they show in the commercial that Craig's dad, I guess their grandma was in the commercial, and the dad really smacked the hell out of her, even though he was supposed to be acting. And they kind of show them going in the back in the kitchen, cooking up stuff and getting stuff ready, prepared for the day. And the grandma is there, like half out of it still, and she has this big old black eye on her face that kind of from the smack. And she still finds herself nodding off because she probably got a little concussion from that thing, and it kind of goes from that and going into watching Craig and Day Day in their day and the first day of being the security guards around the lot. And then obviously you meet new characters like Cat Williams playing Money Mike, the little pimp that owns a clothing store, and the shenanigans they get into with him and the girl that was supposed to be Money Mike's girl, but ended up, there was something going on between her and Craig and all that other stuff, and everything that happens in between that spot, from Day Day kind of having this power trip, so to speak, him being the security guard and thinking he was the head honcho there that ran everything and secured everything, and ends up bad mouthing these church women that were singing out front of the liquor store, and thinking like I said, him with Day Day having a power trip, ended up bad mouthing these women and not knowing that these women had I don't know if they're their sons or they're just the nephews, or if one of them was her son and it just happened to be their cousins with them as well, which would be her nephews or whatever. But they ended up, she ended up getting in contact with these guys and have them kind of go after Day Day, and naturally, because Day Day's in trouble, meaning Craig's in trouble. So these guys end up chasing Craig and Day Day throughout the whole little shopping mall, whatever, and all these things happen. And then the guys ended up beating up the main guy that ran Holy Moly Donut Shops, Mole, and he ended up getting beat up by these guys, and they saw Craig and Day Day eating or whatever, and not knowing that they were using their lunchtime to, or seemingly using their lunchtime to be away from everything, and just so happens that he gets beat up while Craig and Data are having lunch. And then all of a sudden, because he sees them sitting there eating lunch and thinking like they weren't doing their job, he fires Craig and Data, and then they ended up figuring out like, what are we going to do now, and how are we going to get this rent money or whatever. And then Craig comes up with this idea to throw a party at their pad, and kind of just charge people some fun, like some money to get in to party with them. And considering that it was Christmas, and who doesn't enjoy a good Christmas party? You watch that movie and you see them bumping and everyone's dancing and whatnot. And just like, man, I remember house parties like that, man. Those house parties are jumping sometimes, especially when everyone's there to have a good time and enjoy each other's company. That always turns out to be the best. You know what I mean? And that's exactly what ended up happening there. Everyone's having a good time. Some things happened with, which was kind of funny. I guess I failed to mention at some point during the time in which Craig and Day had to pay the rent. They kind of have this not so good relationship with the landlord that runs or I guess the manager of the apartments. And her son had just got out of jail, and she kind of threatened them to pay up, or she was going to have Damon do some things to them. And I mean, you got to watch it for yourself for some of the stuff that they say. It's so funny. And but it does kind of show Damon, played by Terry Crews, how he was in jail, and how he kind of took some of that mentality with him, in which wasn't so good. And I'm not talking in a physical sense either. And apparently the mom was going to send him on Craig and Day to take care of. And anyways, ends up inviting Damon to the party, and also Craig and Dede ended up inviting Money Mike and his lady that her and Craig were vibing with earlier in the movie. And Money Mike comes in, and Damon, being Damon, looking at him weird, and just looking at him, and Craig tells him, look, that's Lucky Charms right there. And this fool Damon goes, he looks magically delicious. And it's just like, what the fuck? And you're just like, here we go now. Something's gonna happen there. And eventually they cross paths, Money Mike and Damon. And Damon tried to take advantage of Money Mike, and Money Mike ends up, getting the best of Damon, because he ends up getting these like vice grips from the toilet. I guess it was holding something together, a bolt or something together on the toilet, and just ended up getting fucking Damon's nutsack with those fucking vice grips, and just basically holds him hostage in a sense of like, you know what I mean? Like, you're trying to take advantage of me, fool. Like, how does this feel now? And he had to get out of there somehow anyway. So he, kind of, like I said, held him hostage to get the hell out of there. And then all that ended up happening. Craig and Day ended up finding the imposter Santa, and going back and getting all the stuff that he stole from them. And I think possibly like other people's stuff that he may have stolen from other people that they knew. And finding some extra money, obviously, to help them pay the rent. And then, everything was A-okay thereafter. And like I said, that movie to me became an instant Christmas classic, so to speak, because you know what I mean? Like, there's not too many Christmas. Like I said, there was always those normal Christmas movies that you would watch. But considering that, all the things that happen throughout this movie and the Christmas vibe and settings that is in the movie, I highly consider one of those Christmas movies that I have to watch during the Christmas season. So, and that I'm pretty sure that was the whole goal of it all, to kind of give a different approach to the Christmas season, and a comedy, obviously a nice comedy to watch during the holiday season. And I'm glad they did it. And that sums up the whole Friday trilogy. So far we have number 5, Godfather; 4, the Friday trilogy. Coming in at number 3, Back to the Future, parts 1, 2, and 3. The first part, Back to the Future, digs into this teenager, Marty McFly, that he meets up with his scientist friend, which it's kind of weird. They never really get into a whole lot of detail on how him and Doc Brown met or meet up, outside of the fact that Doc Brown has developed this time machine via DeLorean and invites Marty McFly to a demonstration and shows him how this new time machine works. And in doing so, Doc Brown gets himself into a bit of a situation. And ultimately Marty gets involved just because he's there. And in doing so, what happens is that the people that Doc Brown kind of I guess like a deal went bad, and the people that he kind of screwed over and ends up finding him on where he's at, and is getting ready to, per se, take him out and kill him. Well, in doing so, Marty gets into the car, and it's kind of funny how that movie goes into with everything that transpires in that moment, where he's being chased by these guys, and he ultimately uses the time machine accidentally, so to speak, and kind of just goes back in time, and he goes from living in 1985 to going back in time to 1955. And he kind of has a hard time realizing that he's back in 1955 as anyone else would, and kind of gets into all these things. And what's crazy about this movie is the storyline and the information that is being told within the storyline, because obviously you don't want to make it seem like your audience is dumb watching the movie, and you kind of have to tell a storyline that makes sense. I mean, obviously, for people who probably watched it and or thought of this movie in any which way it was given to them, thought like, well, what would happen what are the repercussions of doing something in the past that involves the future or present time? And Marty gets into quite a bit of shenanigans in terms of meeting his mother and father in a much younger presence of them, obviously, right? 30 years prior to, seeing them 30 years younger as teenagers, and basically like his age. Excuse me. And he gets into so much things that ultimately kind of messes with his present time and back in 1985. And now he has to do things to kind of rectify the mistakes he has possibly made, and goes and does things to correct what mistakes he has caused, to make sure that his timeline is stable, and does some things along the way that kind of changes the way his timeline looks in 1985, but seemingly for the better. And does what he needs to do in order to get back to his timeline. He meets a younger version of Doc Brown, and does what they both do these things where they have to figure out how to get him back in time, because obviously the in the movie the Mandalorian, the time machine, is run off. It's run off nuclear substance. And forgive me for not knowing what it needed. I kind of feel like knocking myself in the head for not knowing offhand, because I've seen that movie so many times. I just know it's a nuclear type of thing. I think it's petroleum that's needed in order to fuel the car. And they obviously, going back in 1955, I mean, there's no way to really get that. So they understand that the power it takes to even get the time machine to run properly is 1.21 gigawatts of power is needed, which is a bolt of lightning, which they ended up finding that, in that time frame, there was a storm, a great storm that blew up the town, the town's main clock in its time, like little town square that it has there. And that bolt of lightning is going to hit the clock tower. And they need that bolt of lightning to transfer into the car. And they figured out how to do it. And everything that happens within that time frame just goes as nuts as one can think it can go. And at the end of the movie, obviously, they figure it out. They get everything going, and Marty gets sent back into 1985, which kind of some things changed in his timeline, but seemingly for the better for him and his family. But then where number one leaves off, number two picks up, which was also kind of like a cool thing to see as well, in terms of going into a sequel, from one movie ending a certain way to the second movie literally picking back up where the first one ended. And that was pretty cool to see. And that, I guess that's what, obviously triggers intrigue to watching that sort of that movie. And it's kind of funny how Marty McFly's girlfriend obviously changes in terms of the actress who plays her. You have one girl obviously having seemingly looked at one way, and then if flash forward to the second movie that comes up, and it's a completely different actress playing that lady. But anyways, Doc Brown finds himself going to the future to see how everything is, and turns out Marty kind of gets himself into trouble, and Doc feels like he needs to change whatever's happened in this time or in the future, a moment in time in the future, to help escape the troubles that Marty gets himself into in the future. But going into the future, there are some things that happen. And an older Biff ends up finding out that Doc Brown created a time machine to go back in time. And Biff is the father's bully back in high school from the first movie. And what happens is once Biff finds out that this time machine is existent, or it exists now, he understands that he can use that time machine to kind of use that time machine to go back in time and kind of rectify the things that happened to him through the course of the first film. And what happens is he gets Marty, while in the future, thinks it would be nice to get a sports book that kind of gives the final score of each game of each sport within the time frame of 25 years. And he wanted to take that with him back into the past and possibly make some bets to make a little bit of money. Well, the older Biff was snooping around. He overhears Marty and his plans. So when Marty and Doc Brown get a little sidetracked with the side mission, Biff kind of takes the sports almanac and takes it into the past in the events of the first film, and lets Biff know all the things that he could do with that book and creating bets. And when Marty comes back into his current timeline, yellow. And once he comes back into his timeline, he realizes the timeline that he was in is completely gone, because they are unaware that Biff took the sports almanac to change things in the past during the first film into Marty's current timeline, and which is part of the second film. I know it can be confusing and crazy, so do yourself a favor and watch the trilogy and you understand what the hell I'm talking about. And what ends up happening is, Marty's now living in a different time frame, or I guess a different time, so to speak, because of the events that happened in which Biff made all this money making bets, basically doing everything that Marty was going to do, and eventually finds out that Biff had this sports book and that, all these things that happen. So what happens is Marty goes back to Doc and let him know about everything that's happened, in which Doc Brown already knows, because he sees what happens to him within the course of that time frame in which they were gone. And they have to go back into the past during the events of the first film in order to fix what happens during the time old Biff goes back in time and does all the things that he does to wreck the current timeline that Marty and Doc Brown live in. So everything goes back into the first film, and they kind of have to, now Marty has to kind of sneak around his older self in that older timeline to kind of avoid what happens, because if anything happens within the time in which Marty previously was in, kind of screws any of that previous plan up, then it's going to affect everything that happens within his timeline that he goes back into of the present time. So anyways, a lot of things happens. They ended up getting the sports almanac. And then in the midst of everything that's happened, they're back into this seemingly back into this position where the thunderstorm and the big lightning coming up, and lightning strikes not only at the clock tower but in other places and where they're at in terms of where they live. And what happens is in the middle of getting back the sports almanac and getting away from Biff and kind of getting into a little spot, lightning strikes the DeLorean while Doc Brown is in the car. And again, how part 2 ends, part 3 picks up completely where it ends. And which is also cool, like, just to know that these 3 movies kind of piggyback off of each ending going into the beginning of the next film. And what happens is at the end of the second one, this person comes up to Marty McFly in the middle of the road there, and there's a letter from Doc Brown stating that the time machine is broken and he's stuck back in the Old West, like in 1885 instead of 1985. And what happens is that Marty has to try to figure out how to I guess Doc Brown leaves the DeLorean buried somewhere from the being in the Old West, and Marty and Doc have to. And this goes into the third one. Marty and Doc Brown have to go dig up that old DeLorean and kind of use it again and help Marty get back into the Old West to talk to Doc Brown and figure out how to kind of fix this thing into where they can come back to the to the present time that they lived in. And all same thing, all these things happen in the Old West that prior movies, the first and second one, they kind of have little tidbits of what happened in the Old West pertaining to the McFly family and or Biff's family back in the day. And you kind of see these characters kind of pop up now because they're in the West, the Old West, and a lot of things happen in there. Doc Brown meets a lady that he ends up falling in love with, and the only way they can use the DeLorean again in terms of getting back in time is by hooking it up to a train and getting it up to a certain speed, 88 miles per hour, to go back into the current time. And what ends up happening is Doc Brown helps out Marty get back in time, but ends up staying behind a little bit. And then once Marty realizes that happens, he goes back and sees that the time frame in which Biff kind of corrupted and messed up is now back to normal. And as these things happened, Doc Brown ends up coming back with a time machine that is made up of a train, and kind of just lets him know that I'm not going to be doing this time travel thing much longer, but I have my family now. He has kids. He's married now to this lady that he fell in love from back in the Old West, and they go out and do things for themselves, and Marty goes out and lives his life. But that is the trilogy of Back to the Future, which is a real good trilogy movie in terms of just adventure, comedy, and it was a real treat in terms of cinema history. And like I said, it's number 3 on my list, which gets us into number 2, the Dark Knight trilogy, Christopher Nolan's aspect storytelling of the Batman, which we, including myself, a lot of people remember Batman from the late 80s with Michael Keaton, and would say that that's their Batman type of movie, you know what I mean? But what Christopher Nolan was able to do in terms of storytelling, obviously with the Batman Begins, and then the Dark Knight, and then the Dark Knight Rises, the story he was able to tell kind of, it's weird because when Batman and Batman Returns came out, I believe Tim Burton directed and told that story of Batman, which was kind of dark in a sense, but like it still had its cartoony, darkish, something Tim Burton can just someone only Tim Burton can pull off, seemingly in his storytelling. And it still had that weird cartoonish, because the Joker was thrown in a vat of chemicals, and the Penguin was had some deformities that made him look like an actual bird penguin, and Catwoman was possessed by the soul of a cat, seemingly, and became Catwoman, which I'm sure some of these may have been part of the comics at some point, but just knowing that that's what Tim Burton chose to go with. And then obviously the 2 crazy ass movies of the Batman, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, those weird ass adaptations of the Batman movie, of the series itself. They just seem so cartoonish in terms of characters and villains. And then eventually, when Christopher Nolan decided to take up telling the story of the Batman, he kind of really made it seem like real life. You know what I mean? He had one of the first villains in Batman Begins. There was two separate villains. There was Ra's al Ghul, and then there was the Scarecrow. And both villains were, to me, believable in terms of what they would be, as if they were real people. They weren't so cartoonish. From what I remember in terms of the storyline for Ra's al Ghul, he was just this mythical person who, had seemingly, had this cult-like place in which they kind of adapted into the movie, but it wasn't, from what I took from some of the stuff that I seen within comics and cartoons and other adaptations, was that he was just like this guy who used like almost sorcery, if you will, to an ancient sorcery to be a certain way and doing these things. But what Christopher Nolan was able to do was kind of make that into like a real life thing where it wasn't so magic. It was just him being very smart and very strategic in how he wanted to carry out his plans and things of that nature. He still had like a ninja based type of background, but he clearly was using it for evil intentions rather than good intentions, and tells the whole story how Bruce Wayne becomes Batman and all this other things like any other Batman story. But it adapted a real life feel of what it would actually be like in real life, and how some of these villains and characters would be portrayed. And then obviously the Dark Knight with Heath Ledger's Joker, which was an instant legend classic of a character being portraying the Joker. And obviously you see the success and what that brought to the cinematic scheme of things, and how that broke so many boundaries in terms of how to portray a character and the things that he had to do in order to become that character, which was really, very challenging, and I'm sure very crazy in terms of how to develop a character. But even the Joker, it didn't really get into anything. It wasn't said that he was dumped in a vat of chemicals. It just seems like he was just this mentally disturbed dude who got pleasure into pulling cruel jokes on people and killing them at the same time. You know what I mean? But Christopher Nolan made that seem like such, the Joker was a real person and not just this made up thing or made up person. And, within that also was Two-Face. If you watch, there's a difference between the Tommy Lee Jones version of Two-Face, which I would say was played very well by Tommy Lee Jones, but seeing Eric Eckhart, the actor's name, play this version of Two-Face, he just looked very real. His face was regular on one side and the other one was completely burnt to the skull. And you can, it just made it seem so real, like in real life. And, even going into the third one, Bane wasn't so character. Like, he wasn't such a cartoon character type of a villain, even though in comic books and other movies and cartoons portrayed him as such this big, huge, overly big guy and use a poison toxin to make him big and all this other stuff. It just seemed like Christopher Nolan turned Bane into this man that took up the likings of Ra's al Ghul's teachings, and kind of just ran with this weird sense of terrorism that, he was so, he was also strategic in how he wanted to carry out his terrorism, which ultimately became, a huge villain. And just with the third one itself too, seeing how the lady that was played ultimately ended up becoming or revealing that she was Ra's al Ghul's daughter, which was also played out in the comic books prior to, I believe, Batman at some point during that had a relationship with the daughter and everything. So to kind of put that into the third movie and kind of give Christopher Nolan to give that his adaptation of what that would be like, it was just all around such a good series and a good trilogy to watch, and see how that version of Batman was played out. Because, like I said, those movies prior, during the late 80s, early 90s, and early 2000s, they were all played out very. Those were cartoonish compared to this. Like I said, Christopher Nolan's adaptation of this was very well put together, and storylines were really good, and really set the boundaries for telling a comic book story and making it into a movie. But that it's hard for me to go into all that, because I mean, every Batman movie is the same thing. He becomes Batman and takes on some villains, and he has his day, which he takes care of the villains and so on and so forth. There's nothing I can say furthermore that no one wouldn't really know about Batman. But I mean, it is such a great trilogy and a good watch, and I'd highly recommend those who haven't watched them to take a look into those ones, as much as well as the other movies I have brought up, such as The Godfather, the Friday trilogies, Back to the Future. Definitely go and watch the Dark Knight trilogy. It's a good watch, and that leads up to number one. I think the number one trilogy, in my personal opinion, is Lord of the Rings. Now, I know this sounds weird, but I wasn't a big Lord of the Rings fan growing up. It wasn't until I got into my adult years until I started watching them. And it's not even just, I hate to say it feels like I'm nerding out here, but it's not even just that. It's the storytelling. It's how it's brought up to you. It's how it's presented. And, the first movie, The Fellowship of the Ring, was such a good storytelling movie to kind of give you the aspect of, or kind of give you the breakdown of why the ring was created to begin with, and what it meant to the world at hand in which they lived in, and how it would bring certain things to light if it were to prosper. Going into the second one, The Two Towers, which kind of kind of picks up from the first one as well, where they're just, Frodo Baggins is given this ring from the first one to kind of head out into Mordor, to where the ring was created, and that the only way the ring can be destroyed is by throwing it into the fire in which it came from. And the second one kind of picks up where they left off in terms of the journey in which they have to go, and all the things that they have to go through in terms of getting there. There was a hobbit at one point named Smeagol that found the ring prior to Frodo getting this ring, and it turned him into this weird creature, which he named himself Gollum. And what happens is, even in the first one, they kind of show little things of Gollum track, like following them on their journey. And it wasn't until the second one where he's fully presented in all his form to show that what type of creature he had become and how he looks like. And eventually, you kind of see. Outside of Frodo's journey going into Mordor, you see kind of all the things that is happening outside of that with Gandalf and the other side is Saruman trying to create an army for the evil, and it just becomes a classic story and battle of good and evil, and just all the things that come along with the fantasy sci-fi type of stuff, or fantasy action adventure, because some of the action scenes that follow not only in the first movie but in the second one are really crazy and kind of cool. which kind of goes into the third one, Return of the King, and you kind of see how everything goes from the beginning leading up to this third film, with Aragon leading the way, knowing that, in the first film, Aragon is presented as as an heir to a kingdom, and he doesn't want to take up the mantle because he just never wanted it, and just everything that goes into those first two films is obviously all concluded into this third film. And eventually you kind of see how the armies are created, and they fight in this huge battle to make sure that evil doesn't prevail. And just, it's a classic good versus evil type story, along with crazy looking creatures and whatnot. And it's just all around a good storytelling and visual effects and just visuals of the movie itself. And is quite highly recommended to watch the trilogy of it all. If you can withstand watching those movies, I would highly recommend watching that. And that's going to do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed the kind of breakdown of my top 5 trilogy in the cinematic world. Hope it wasn't too long. I hope you guys didn't feel too bored hearing me nerd out a little bit. But you know what? I love movies. I love watching them. I love diving deep into the storyline itself. I love visual effects. I love storylines. I love the presentation of movies, and I've obviously always been a fan of movies. And hopefully, you guys enjoyed me kind of going over them as well. And at some point, maybe I can go over other movies, like some comedy movies. I've watched movies all my life, like some others, I'm pretty sure, and really enjoyed a lot of movies and a lot of franchises as well. And I hope to bring some more details into the movies I do like, and I hope you guys had a good listen. I hope you guys have a good day, and thank you for tuning in, and I will see you guys later on down the road. Peace out.